something I noticed, for instance, is when I sold my business, it did not change my day-to-day reality as much as when I stepped away from being CEO. That changed my day-to-day reality much more. But having the money was like a pathway to doing that. So even like when you think about like money and happiness, right? Like it does not directly give you happiness. There's a ton of indirect ways of using money to be happy. A good example is like, so I think something, especially now that I talk to a lot of people about money, I realize a lot of your attitudes about money, like most things are formed very early in life. Like, it's the things that your parents may say as a throwaway comment that really stays with you. And for me, I remember the money that changed my life was not what happened at selling Teachable. It's what happened when I was 19 or 20 years old, when I was in college. And my parents had spent their entire life, they were like, middle class, working in the Middle East, saving money for me to go to college in a way that like they spent differently for their entirety of their life just to be able to afford to send me to America, right? Like the cost of living differential was so much, it was really, really expensive. But when I was in college, I built a business that was, creating Facebook applications, making a little bit of money online. And there was a point in my second year of college where I realized I could actually pay for the majority of college myself. And that was completely transformational because prior to that point, money was this like source of guilt where I'm like, oh, my parents have worked their entire life just to be able to do this for me, that it was kind of this load on me. But as soon as I could pay for college, I'm like, this is awesome. I don't have to go to class anymore. Like, this is my money, right? Like literally, I was so guilty. I would always go to class even though I didn't want to because I'm like, oh, my parents have worked really hard for this. But later on, as soon as I could like pay for college myself, it kind of got rid of those feelings of guilt about, oh, my parents spent their entire life working just for me to be able to do this. So at that point, it was completely transformational. By the time I sold Teachable, of course, it was nice to have and definitely, helped in a lot of ways. It wasn't as transformational as it was at that point when I was, 19 or 20 years old.
It's interesting because I think one thing I've noticed, like in my own life and then also the conversations with the guests, things that happen in like childhood and your early years and even college years, it like sticks with you.
Yeah.
It's still with you. It still has a certain influence. And when I'm listening to you, it's interesting that you say like the guilt and like that feeling. And I can imagine it's like these two people that I care so much about have sacrificed so much for me to just be in this position. And there's almost like, I can imagine the thought is like, I need to do something with that. I need to capitalize on that. You think for you, like when you made the money, did the guilt vanish? Or would you say that the guilt is still something that you wrestle with today?
I think the guilt evolved, right? I think earning that money and being able to pay for the majority of college myself was kind of freeing. In that I now felt like I could spend my time the way I wanted to. So it helped. The guilt then sort of took a different form. And I think it's sort of more similar to like immigrant guilt of like, oh, my parents have worked so hard to like for me to have a better life, but now they live much further away and I see them less often. And the guilt took a different form. It's still there in some shape, but a different form, more of like, and a lot of immigrants have this, right? Your parents like make a lot of sacrifices. They work really hard just for you to have a better life. But very often, by virtue of you having a better life, you're actually further away from them as they get older. And I think that's the form the guilt took. It's less about sort of the financial aspect, more about they're getting older and, we're like geographically far apart, but that's almost a sacrifice they had to make for me to live a better life.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think like maybe as like a culture and people, and maybe it's a Western thing, I don't know, but we spend so much time thinking about money, right? Like we're obsessed with money. And a lot of the times we have these problems in our life. Maybe it's a problem with like a relationship. Maybe it's a problem with ourselves or like an insecurity. And we think money is going to be the solve. Like money is the solution. If I just had more money, then everything else would be resolved. And it's interesting listening to you because it's almost like, it feels like a trade-off. It's like you're swapping one problem with the next. It's like, okay, now I have more money, but there's more distance.
Mm-hmm.
As you've earned more money, what would you say are what are the things that have come with it? What's the dark side to money that I guess people wouldn't really know?
In general, I think having money is great. I'm not going to sit here and be like, woe is me. And, things are
Yeah.
things are awful. I think the framing I like is like, when you have money, you've solved the money problem.
Mm.
But that's all it really is, right? So for me, the freedom, like, money has meant freedom, and that's been great. It's, I've been able to go ahead and like live the life I want and do the things I want, and I think that has been awesome. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily been a dark side to it, as much as, like, you just realize you've solved the money problem, and every other thing that you may be dealing with is still there. But for me, it is, it's definitely been something that, like, something I noticed, for instance, is when I sold my business, it did not change my day-to-day reality as much as when I stepped away from being CEO. That changed my day-to-day reality much more. But having the money was like a pathway to doing that. So even like when you think about like money and happiness, right? Like, it does not directly give you happiness. There's a ton of indirect ways of using money to be happy. A good example is like being generous with people. It's like clearly shown it will make you happier. Or, because of having money, you can spend more time with people you care about, which makes you happier. Like, so there are ways of sort of, using it as a tool to make you happier. But I don't know, like, buying a bunch of like expensive shit that's gonna like be so fleeting that I don't think that's really. And I think that's when people get hung up on, right? Like, they do that, they like buy a bunch of like material possessions, and they're like, okay, this hasn't changed my baseline.
You think that mindset that you have now surrounding money is different from how you thought when you were 18, 19? How has it shifted?
I think it's evolved for sure, but I remember my friends found it very strange, even when I was fortunate to make money when I was 20, 21 years old. I was remarkably like not stupid about it. Like, I did not go to Vegas and like gamble a bunch. I did not buy a bunch of stupid things. The stupid thing I bought was like a nice apartment in San Francisco, which is like an investment, right? So like, even then, I think it's probably just the way I was raised, where we were, middle class growing up. And as a result, like, my instincts were always like, oh, save it, right? Because who knows what may come in the future. You're better off saving it. In fact, like, that sort of mentality probably was a mistake, because I didn't invest money, because I was like, oh, let's just keep it in a bank account, which now, knowing more about money, I'm like, it's one of the stupidest things I could have done. But it was sort of this middle class mentality of like, who knows what things will look like in the future. You should save it, which, looking back now, it's kind of atypical for like a 20 or 21-year-old, where instead of like wanting to like, flex on people, I was like, I'm just going to save this and keep it. But that's sort of how I was then. And even now, it really, I think, like, from a quality of life perspective, I have a nice house now. I like, when I travel, I like to travel ideally on a flatbed if it's a long flight. But like, outside of that, I haven't had like major sort of lifestyle upgrades. It's just more been like, now I don't have to think about things. Like, if I go to a restaurant, I don't care what I order. If I go to the grocery store, I'm not looking at the price of stuff. I'll get room service. Like, it's all these small things that I think have changed, but bigger picture, my lifestyle is not looking dramatically different.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, has there ever been a pull towards that? And what I mean is, like, so often you see the stories of like someone gets money, the Lambo's coming.
Yeah.
I'm going on fancy holidays. I don't know. I'm popping bottles. There's something's happening. Was there ever a pull for you?
I mean, dude, like, literally after, I remember I sold the company. It was 2020. It was COVID. We were in lockdown. I wanted to get a car because I'm like, oh, I can go to the beach. I can go surfing. Even then, I bought a secondhand car. Like, it didn't make sense. Like, I was like, you're losing so much of like the retail value. I'm just gonna buy a secondhand car.
Yeah.
So not really. Like, But I think the thing that's been nice is like, okay, let's say I'm like going on a vacation with my parents or family or whatever. We can like stay in a nicer place than they've like ever stayed at before, and that feels like great for the entire family. So things like that I will absolutely like spend money on. But no, some things I'm still like pretty cheap about.